Hello folks, and welcome back to Symbols, Patterns, and Gnosis. As always, this is Jason Bickford. As the title of the page kind of points to, we're going to be unpacking some interesting patterns within a universal myth that's reoccurring, but sometimes obfuscated and remixed. And there's some myth conceptions based on poor translations I'll try to clear up. We're going to talk about Jinn, Naga, Nephilim, shapeshifters, reptilian symbolism, knowledge, also wisdom. So this is Gnostic Sunday School 13. And I also want to take a look at J.R.R. Tolkien's Christian esotericism. Tolkien was an esotericist Christian. Most of his fans are not these days. So you'll find a lot of the people in the fantasy fiction world don't understand why dragons spelled backwards is a symptom of a co-creative faculty embedded in the fossils of consciousness of language. Snowguard would be the song of fire and ice. That's dragons, and dragons spelled backwards. So we're wrestling with ourselves, and there's false light in the garden, and there's true light in the garden. We're going to take a look at some scenes from the Amazon Prime series Rings of Power, based on books from Tolkien. And the series diverges from the Tolkien material somewhat, but stays true to that symbol in the esotericist Christian idea. Lucifer is an adjective, not a name. Let's take a look at false light.
Go back to the shadow.
But sometimes the lights shine just as brightly reflected in the water as they do in the sky. How am I to know which lights to follow?
Sometimes we cannot know until we have touched the darkness.
In Rings of Power, we see symbolically a rite of passage. We are on the rope, walking a tightrope, so to speak. So we have Galadriel here. Her name reminds me of Galahad and Ariel. She's the little mermaid who went through the waters above or waters below through a gate, shed a tear. So that's water falling. And then we have the juxtaposition with fire. We have fire and ice, flame and water, and a woman forsaking union with her people to follow false light. And we have a red-headed David Bowie-looking serpent. We have a false light reflected on the handle of that sword. Sword is an anagram for words, and we have some bad advice here. So we have this fair-skinned, redhead, androgynous, kind of David Bowie-looking character. Almost looks like Tilda Swinton and David Bowie, the man from Mars who sold the world. Looks like, is this the devil in the Quarantina calling you? So this is a two-way street. You got to cross the street. He'll call you over, but you got to cross the street to go. The devil will call you. You came. You can't say the devil made you do it. And so we have Galadriel, who is a victim of temptation. She's got some unsettled business. She doesn't want to go into the light. And then she looks over at the sword, and as I said, there's a reflection there that's coming from the ground up, and that reflected light does not represent any light that's actually in the scene. So there would be no need for that light to be there. So that's a false light on the handle. Handle is another name for, or another name for name. Handle is used by, let's say truckers will use that. Hey, what's your handle? That's your name. What's your name? Anyway. We've got the interesting biblical story of Jonah represented here, and I want to go into that. We've got Jonah has a calling, and he forsakes that calling and flees from God and ends up diving into some water, going down into Sheol, and then a large fish or ship or shift, a big shift happens, and he's spit back out and then completes his mission to preach to a town that is getting condemned and warned by God of their error of their ways. And so Jonah's on a mission. And in Ropes of Power, we've got Galadriel, and then we've got the meteor man, the giant who falls and is on fire. So we have this passage through water, a passage through fire. We have one being from one world ascending into another level of reality, and then a giant coming down. So we've got that song of fire and ice, dragons and Snowguard. Here's Jonah.
Now the word of the Lord came to Jonah the son of Amittai, saying, Arise, go to Nineveh, that great city, and call out against it, for their evil has come up before me. But Jonah rose to flee to Tarshish from the presence of the Lord. He went down to Joppa and found a ship going to Tarshish. So he paid the fare and went down into it, to go with them to Tarshish, away from the presence of the Lord. But the Lord hurled a great wind upon the sea, and there was a mighty tempest on the sea, so that the ship threatened to break up. Then the mariners were afraid, and each cried out to his God. And they hurled the cargo that was in the ship into the sea to lighten it for them. But Jonah had gone down into the inner part of the ship, and had lain down and was fast asleep. So the captain came and said to him, What do you mean, you sleeper? Arise, call out to your God. Perhaps the God will give a thought to us, that we may not perish. And they said to one another, Come, let us cast lots, that we may know on whose account this evil has come upon us. So they cast lots, and the lot fell on Jonah. Then they said to him, Tell us on whose account this evil has come upon us. What is your occupation, and where do you come from? What is your country, and of what people are you? And he said to them, I am a Hebrew, and I fear the Lord, the God of heaven, who made the sea and the dry land. Then the men were exceedingly afraid and said to him, What is this that you have done? For the men knew that he was fleeing from the presence of the Lord, because he had told them. Then they said to him, What shall we do to you that the sea may quiet down for us? For the sea grew more and more tempestuous. He said to them, Pick me up and hurl me into the sea. Then the sea will quiet down for you, for I know it is because of me that this great tempest has come upon you. Nevertheless, the men rowed hard to get back to dry land, but they could not, for the sea grew more and more tempestuous against them. Therefore they called out to the Lord, O Lord, let us not perish for this man's life, and lay not on us innocent blood. For you, O Lord, have done as it pleased you. So they picked up Jonah and hurled him into the sea, and the sea ceased from its raging. Then the men feared the Lord exceedingly, and they offered a sacrifice to the Lord and made vows. And the Lord appointed a great fish to swallow up Jonah. And Jonah was in the belly of the fish 3 days and 3 nights. Then Jonah prayed to the Lord his God from the belly of the fish, saying, I called out to the Lord out of my distress, and he answered me. Out of the belly of Sheol I cried, and you heard my voice. For you cast me into the deep, into the heart of the seas, and the flood surrounded me. All your waves and your billows passed over me. Then I said, I am driven away from your sight, yet I shall look again upon your holy temple. The waters closed in over me to take my life. The deep surrounded me. Weeds were wrapped about my head at the roots of the mountains. I went down to the land whose bars closed upon me forever. Yet you brought up my life from the pit, O Lord my God. When my life was fainting away, I remembered the Lord, and my prayer came to you into your holy temple. Those who pay regard to vain idols forsake their hope of steadfast love. But I, with the voice of thanksgiving, will sacrifice to you. What I have vowed, I will pay. Salvation belongs to the Lord. And the Lord spoke to the fish, and it vomited Jonah out upon the dry land. Then the word of the Lord came to Jonah the second time, saying, Arise, go to Nineveh, that great city, and call out against it the message that I tell you. So Jonah arose and went to Nineveh, according to the word of the Lord. Now Nineveh was an exceedingly great city, 3 days' journey in breadth. Jonah began to go into the city, going a day's journey. And he called out, Yet 40 days, and Nineveh shall be overthrown. And the people of Nineveh believed God. They called for a fast and put on sackcloth, from the greatest of them to the least of them. The word reached the king of Nineveh, and he arose from his throne, removed his robe, covered himself with sackcloth, and sat in ashes. And he issued a proclamation and published through Nineveh, by the decree of the king and his nobles, let neither man nor beast, herd nor flock, taste anything. Let them not feed or drink water, but let man and beast be covered with sackcloth, and let them call out mightily to God. Let everyone turn from his evil way and from the violence that is in his hands. Who knows? God may turn and relent, and turn from his fierce anger, so that we may not perish. When God saw what they did, how they turned from their evil way, God relented of the disaster that he had said he would do to them, and he did not do it. But it displeased Jonah exceedingly, and he was angry. And he prayed to the Lord and said, O Lord, is not this what I said when I was yet in my country? That is why I made haste to flee to Tarshish. For I knew that you are a gracious God and merciful, slow to anger and abounding in steadfast love, and relenting from disaster. Therefore now, O Lord, please take my life from me, for it is better for me to die than to live. And the Lord said, Do you do well to be angry? Jonah went out of the city and sat to the east of the city and made a booth for himself there. He sat under it in the shade, till he should see what would become of the city. Now the Lord God appointed a plant and made it come up over Jonah, that it might be a shade over his head, to save him from his discomfort. So Jonah was exceedingly glad because of the plant. But when dawn came up the next day, God appointed a worm that attacked the plant, so that it withered. When the sun rose, God appointed a scorching east wind, and the sun beat down on the head of Jonah, so that he was faint. And he asked that he might die, and said, It is better for me to die than to live. But God said to Jonah, Do you do well to be angry for the plant? And he said, Yes, I do well to be angry enough to die. And the Lord said, You pity the plant, for which you did not labor, nor did you make it grow, which came into being in a night, and perished in the night. And should not I pity Nineveh, that great city, in which there are more than 120,000 persons, who do not know their right hand from their left, and also much cattle?
So here we have people who do not know their left from their right. They do not know what is right and wrong, up and down. They do not know life from death. They don't understand where they are. Jason, in the book of Acts, chapter 17, is accused of inverting the world, and he and his cohorts are thrown in prison after representing a different king other than Caesar by the name of Christ. So it sounds like Jason might have been a little bit of a political dissident. Anyway, we've got the rite of passage, and we have this idea of one being coming down through fire, another through water, different agendas. One is sacrificing in the fall through fire as a giant to come and diminish itself so that it can become simpatico with some what looks like pagan spirits in the form of the Harfoot, the original tribe that would later become the Hobbits. So perhaps a little bit of that giant DNA into the Harfoot line created some hobbits. And maybe Galadriel, who is coming down with a, let's say, a mission to exterminate all of the orcs. She has a bit of a Nazi look to her. She looks Nordic, tall, soldier, blonde hair, blue eyes. So she's an Aryan-looking girl who's swearing to exterminate a race of dark beings off the planet. And those dark beings seem to have somewhat human-like personalities, similar to the elves being somewhat human-like. So it comes across as a bit distasteful. And we see other people of mixed races in the Harfoots making nice. And then there's Jesus as Gandalf. Is the meteor man Gandalf before his baptism?
Show yourself!
It cannot be. Forgive me. I mistook you for Saruman.
I am Saruman. Rather Saruman as he should have been.
You fell.
Through fire and water. From the lowest dungeon to the highest peak, I fought him, the Balrog of Morgoth. Until at last I threw down my enemy and smote his ruin upon the mountainside. Darkness took me, and I strayed out of thought and time. The stars wheeled overhead, and every day was as long as a life age of the earth. But it was not the end. I felt life in me again. I've been sent back until my task is done. Gandalf? Yes. That was what they used to call me. Gandalf the Grey. That was my name. Gandalf. I am Gandalf the White. And I come back to you now. At the turn of the tide.
No, don't! He's dead! Come on!
Okay, so let's take a look at how some of these kind of fragmented or shattered, and shattered is another word for crucified if you take a look at that New Testament etymology and look at the fossils of consciousness. You'll see embedded within the consciousness is a shattered mind that's put back together. J.R.R. Tolkien, as a Christian esotericist, is someone that was on a long journey of looking through historical records and mythologies in order to piece together a lost story that was kind of torn apart by a pack of wolves, and everybody got their little table scraps of the myth. And we see throughout modern times inspired Christian symbolism like the fall of Sophia in 1 Corinthians 1:30 embedded in the very transgender movement. That's also a part of the Luciferian myth conceptions of false light and false information. And that is the wisdom of the serpents, but the knowledge of harm and what it does and the cost of that. So Christ advises us to be knowledgeable and wise like the serpents, but not to be harmful. So suggesting in a way that the quality the serpents possess is a type of knowledge, and that the doves have a wisdom that is when to use that knowledge and when not to. And if you have that knowledge without the wisdom, you might develop, say, military technology. We have a tree-killing worm in the book of Jonah that is represented in the fiery serpent of Numbers 23, I believe. And we also have the fiery serpent represented in the whip of Balrog, who attacks a tree that is sacred to the elves. So we have the elven people looking kind of, they have strong women and effeminate men or gentle men. So they have a kind of androgynous quality. Liv Tyler plays one of the elves, and her father sings an Aerosmith of "Dude Looks Like a Lady." And we see the smiths or the master builders in the tall whites in the ship that looks like an arrow heading into the white light. Is that missing the mark or hitting the target? Is that a sin or not? I suppose it depends on how you look at it. We have the harrowing of Hades represented in Gandalf sacrificing himself in this battle against Balrog. He goes down through a passage into fire to fight that fiery serpent and the killer of the tree. This story is represented in the mythology of the harrowing of Hades, in which Christ, after being crucified, goes down into Hades or Sheol, which is the underworld where all the dead go before they are sorted out. And so, well, it looks like Gandalf is going down into hell to sort some business out, and Galadriel has to not join her people in the light, but go back down into Middle Earth or Purgatory to keep fighting a game. So we have that battle of fire and ice representing that battle with the lion and Aslan in the Gospel of Thomas, Logia 7. And in Isaiah 14:12, Nebuchadnezzar's fall crashes or falls down like lightning. And this causes misconception or myth conception, in which the word Lucifer is used as an adjective. And it's become a name for the devil, which is a complete misunderstanding of a word that didn't even belong in the Old Testament in the first place. It's part of Jerome's Latin Vulgate translation. Anyway, the equivalent of the Latin word for Lucifer, lightbringer, in Greek is phosphorus, and that is what St. Peter uses to describe Jesus. Jesus is a lightbringer, and we see fire is a form of light. Is that false light, or is fire real light? And is the light in the sky, or the light that Galadriel and her people and the elves were going back to, is that a false light? We see a light reflected on the handle of the hilt of that sword. And it looks like a light that isn't represented in the scene. As an artist, I would have a problem rendering that image in CGI because there's a reflected light that doesn't make sense. And I've juxtaposed images here of Balrog with Galadriel because there's a battle that is not over with. She wants to go back and kill all the orcs because of what they did to her people. So we have light and dark, fire and ice. And then we have the bad advice here. Sometimes we cannot know until we touch the darkness. Well, sometimes only means sometimes, right? And sometimes isn't most of the time, and most of the time means more than half. So sometimes is less than most, which is less than half the time. So what we're being told here by the serpent devil in the tree, whose job is temptation and to tell you both ways, and you get it both ways, and then you decide what you want to do. Well, he says sometimes you got to touch the darkness. Yeah, well, most of the time you don't, but she did. So that's how that plays out. And she ends up hooking up with Sauron. And Sauron, spelled backwards, is no ruach. It means no spirit. The guy's a sociopath who just puts drugs and liquor into his system and says whatever he'll say in order to get what he wants. While the giant is having a hard time communicating, but his gentleness and his kindness is evident to these sensitive people of the forest. And I think these people of the forest represent an early pagan spirit or disembodied spirit that was innocent and was here on this earth because a benevolent divine force wanted it to be here. And there's a story in Jewish mythology of Noah spending a quarantina or 40 days in the ark and then coming out with his family and repopulating the earth, but the giants are still on the earth, the Nephilim. And they, how did they get here on the planet? Well, this looks like Gandalf went back in time and then gave a drop of his blood to the Harfoots, and they became the hobbits, and then the hobbits fulfilled their destiny in the future, and Gandalf was there the whole time. He was Gandalf the Grey, which is a middle tone in between black and white, and that's the same as green on the visible color spectrum. So a gray alien or a little green alien represents the man in the middle, or the being that is from Middle Earth. And then you have the visitors, like the elves and the orcs, and they come from up and down stairs into the Middle Earth. So you got the people coming out the basement and the people from the sky coming down, and the people of Middle Earth, the Harfoots, they represent a kind pagan spirit that's not entirely unlike Shesha, the gentle Naga. And that's who this giant looks like. And very often he's shown trying to do one thing, but then he has a little bit of bad luck. And so he doesn't understand he's in the upside down world with the shapeshifters. Make America Great Again is a slogan that can be anagrammed to Ask Me Anything, Naga Image Racketeer, AMA, or the American Medical Association, which brings up some other shape-shifting paradigms that I've talked about with the COVID phenomena. And here we have the Cove Pick phenomena, or the Pirates Cove-id, the skull and bones master builders, who are disembodied spirits embedding their iconography and imagery into works of art by artists who give themselves up to worship of dark spiritual forces. The Naga aim, caretaker image. That's another anagram for Make America Great. The Naga are the shape-shifting serpent-like deities that map onto the dinosaurs of old. So when we see in Jurassic Park new dinosaurs, we're kind of going through Jurassic Park in The Shining with our eyes wide shut. And we see what happens when we let out the old dinosaur reptile brain and let it do what it wants in a dark little corner of the world. Or maybe there's some sort of maritime law where you can go out to your own little pleasure island and have whatever you want. And when these evil Naga sociopathic serpents embody serpents in suits, or sociopathic men in particular, but women are equally dangerous because sometimes they don't seem as threatening and they're a bit more subtle. The Naga are temperamental creatures that spread disease and misfortune when angered. The word Naga means cobra in Sanskrit. So in that image of the milkmaid of Bordeaux, we think of milkmaids as kind of doing this masturbatory motion. It's hard to watch a woman making butter without thinking sexual thoughts. Especially if she's got the old, Renaissance fair bodice on while she's, plunging away at the butter churner. So we got the Milkmaid of Bordeaux by Goya, a known member of the Knights of Malta or St. John, who was also embedding Masonic iconography into his work. He's showing us the image of a Naga serpent stuck in the middle of two worlds. And that's exactly what we see in the overlays of Michelangelo's Sistine Chapel depiction of Genesis 3:24. And 3:24 represents the harrowing of hell. That's the 3 24-hour periods that Christ was in the Hades or Sheol. Or Tartarus is another part that is more torturous. So I think when Dr. Harford goes down into the Eyes Wide Shut Illuminati party, I think he sees what's going on Pleasure Island, which is kind of like outside of a certain type of law. And he recognizes that there's a wall around the garden for a reason, and he was sent east of Eden for a reason. So we also have Lazarus in the garden, or in that realm of the Sheol for 4 days. Lazarus was actually wrapped up in the tomb for 4 days, Christ only 3. So think of Bob Lazar and the UFOs waiting for their tic-tac to show up with the hero, and think of that purgatory realm as this shape-shifting Naga serpent spirit is chained to the tree in the middle. So that's sacred G, I'm a tree. And again with the ginger symbolism of the fair skin and the red hair. That's the RH blood, and also ginger can be anagrammed into a racial epithet. We also have a serpent giving someone a heads up before they're about to, looks like, perform fellatio. And on the way out, Eve no longer looks like a woman, she looks like a castrated man. So that's the tuck everlasting, the everlasting love. So Eve looks feminine in her face there on the left, but then when we flip this image and look at her leaving, she's transgendered. So she's gone into the upside down world. And we have something of a story of Lilith here. And we'll get back into the story of Lilith in Jewish mythology, of alternate stories of Adam's first wife and why there's 2 stories of creation. And it looks like there's a wife swap going on, or something happened here. So we have a world that looks kind of just like the mirror opposite of this one. That's the inverted world of Acts 17. And then we have Adam and Eve getting cast out of the Garden of Eden. Adam and Eve also represent orange and purple, or red and dark. We have the ruddiness, the ability to blush. That is Adam's color. So he had a ruddy complexion. So he was a red man, or ginger. And then Eve is named after the evening, so Eve was dark. So we see here a kind of mixed race union that's also embedded in the two different skin tones when we overlay this image. And the overlays method is something I've shown to be heavily at use in the lower and higher Renaissance. Albrecht Dürer was doing some nefarious things with it. I think Michelangelo and Da Vinci kind of gave us a little bit of a heads up. And we have this D. Snyder, D. Cider, Apple D. Cider stuck in the middle, the judge of all, stuck in Middle Earth. I've seen it all as a symbolism here. We have a bit of a masquerade mask on Adam and Eve as they go from one world to another. And we have the COVID phenomenon pointing to a world in which there's a co-occurrence or a co-creation or two things happening at once. So we have a cultural climate change, a spiritual climate change, and we have a revelation in the overlays of a kind of mirror world, or a world that is symptomatic of a non-physical reality, like laid over this one, that is born out of a co-creative faculty. So artists can literally conduct magic and find themselves tapping into symbols and patterns that are part of a iconographic and pictographic symbol language that's at the substrate of all language. So ultimately what I'm doing with unified code theory is decoding inspired artwork by people that had a particularly strong faculty with this co-creative faculty. So there could be a gentle Naga or a Casper the Friendly Ghost who's helping people out with the co-creative faculty, inspiring them when they approach the co-creative magical art of using the creative imagination for storytelling and myth making. And if you're a particularly good artist, you can actually make myths with a single image, but that might take an entire lifetime to master. That's something I'm in the pursuit of. So we have artists like Michelangelo at the top of his craft who can work with his co-creative faculty so that there is something outside of our perception of time and space that is possibly, in that Genesis 3:24 experience of the harrowing of hell as a disembodied spirit. Christ becomes the Holy Spirit, or Sophia, for us, and that is in 1 Corinthians 1:30. So we have Christ as Sophia, as the Holy Ghost. So Christ dies in one realm and then comes here to a realm as a ghost and helps us wrestle with those lions or the fiery passions or the temptations from the serpent in the tree. So that fiery serpent in the tree is represented in Jonah, when Jonah wants to lay down and take a nap under the shade of a tree, and he's still not doing what God asks him. So God sends a fiery worm to destroy the tree that kills the shade, and now Jonah's in the hot sun and he's got to get to work. So we have a story of a rite of passage. God is putting the fear of God into people to see what they do. So we're told wise men or astrologers come to see Christ and bring him gifts of incense and gold. Why is the incense? Does something stink in here? What's going on? So these guys are called magi, which is interesting because I think of the female term for Naga. Female Naga is a Nagi, N-A-G-I, right? And when we see things as they do in Rome, we're going to lean the tower over and sweep that leg, and we see the Nagi become the magi by going through a rite of passage and coming back as men. So I think possibly homosexuality, narcissism, and transgenderism may have something to do with people going through a porthole and coming into this world. And it's actually embedded in that mystery of the Malaysian Airlines that disappeared and its relationship to symbolism we find at the Pentagon on the events of September 11th. And in the letters for the Na'vi of James Cameron's esoteric Christian mythology of, the mixed race people like the Native American Métis, and we've got that race war happening at the time of a cultural exchange. It's the same exact thing as what's going on in the rites of passage. So we have people going into this virtual digital experience to hop into spirits and trying to become real.
You not be your happy. You will never be one of the people.
So we got dances with wolves, dances with aliens, and there's the Blackfoot embedded in the ship. So we have the Blackfoot and Cree Indians, Native Americans, mixing with the French and creating the Métis people, some of my ancestors. And that symbolism is embedded in 2 different James Cameron films. And, actually it's in his first one, The Abyss. People go down through a water passage and encounter aliens. Now we've got Naga as the Sanskrit word for cobra, and when I think of that changing from Nagi to Magi, the Nagi and the Magi have to sweep the leg, and that's how you get down if you fight with Cobra Kai, right? They fight dirty. They fight dirty meaning that they impact physical matter.
Sweep the leg. You have a problem with that?
So we have fire becoming ice, ice becoming fire, or the 2 combining in the middle in a water world. Oh, there's another James Cameron movie. And of course, James is the name of the brother of Jesus, James the Just. He was a twin brother of Jesus. So we have JC making The Abyss, Waterworld, Dances with Wolves, and Avatar, Dances with Aliens. And they're all Christian.
The Khmer are one of the oldest civilizations in Southeast Asia. And according to mythology, they are the descendants of the serpent god Naga. But after 600 years of dramatic growth, their city witnessed its tragic downfall. The kings of the Khmer were believed to be the links between heaven and earth, mediators between the gods and mankind. But by the 15th century, Phone-e-Yat, the last king of Angkor, was likely desperate to change the gods' minds and save his empire. According to legend, there was a ritual in which the Naga, a snake goddess and guardian over Angkor's prosperity, appeared at night in the shape of a beautiful girl.
Hey, Adam, Khmer Rouge. Is my blush working?
So, once a year we do a Naga Puja here at the Abbey. We usually do it in the springtime when everything's growing and people are going out in the forest and working in the garden and all. And Nagas are beings that belong to the animal realm usually. They say that they're kind of serpent-like. The Nagas are the ones who were they like water. They were the ones that were in the ocean. So Nagarjuna went to the ocean and brought back the Prajnaparamita Sutras, okay, as the story goes. So Nagas are these beings that we share the environment with. Often they're in trees, they're in where there's water or marshes or lakes or streams, things like that. And the reason we started doing this was the very first year when we were here.
Give their bodies to you, their bodies to you. Don't you want devoted followers who leave their families for you, give their money to you, give their bodies to you, give up their lives for you, consider you God, and will kill for you? Don't you want to become a cult leader? Since the death of God, there's been a vacancy open. You could fill that void. Here's how.
I think maybe there's a Naga living here. Yeah, in the tree, because the tree could be the home of the Nagas.
Asian women have the lowest testosterone on the planet, and this is why they're used by these disembodied spirits as labor in the sweatshops. These are the easiest people to push into communism. And communism is to commune with the spirits of the age. So communism and paganism are kind of different aspects of the same bad idea. And these people are under the influencer. When I use the terms demon, shadim, archons, jinn, and disembodied spirits, I'm referring to non-physical beings, seemingly single-minded presences that come to be attached to human beings, get familiar with them, and act as parasites, thereby creating various emotional, mental, and physical problems, ranging from eating disorders, addictions, and uncontrollable extreme emotions, to the most severe of diseases. So this is nothing to shake a stick at. Mainstreaming mental unwellness to a molested culture is ongoing right now. And I believe part of the mainstreaming of mental unwellness, such as in the form of embracing autism and bipolar disorders as enhancements and calling them superpowers even, is itself a manifestation of the collective will of these spirits. I've mentioned before, and we'll go into further detail about my vision of the inverted nature of our emergent, problematic, co-created world and its relationship to Jason, appearing in the book of Acts, chapter 17. And he is a messenger from the inverted world. And the story remains the same. It's a Jonah pattern, it's a Gandalf pattern, it's a Christ pattern. It's a John the Baptist pattern. The topic of handling disembodied spirits and their influence on individuals and entire empires is nothing new. In all traditions and folklores of Earth, one finds references to spirits and non-physical entities that interfere with human beings. One of the most popular of late is the story in Genesis 6 involving fallen angels or Nephilim entering women, and modernized versions of this appear as the alien abduction stories where vapid, attention-seeking women are suddenly impregnated as virgins by aliens. And in Iceland, perhaps the most atheist nation on Earth, some rural areas are known to be home of the Huldufolk, or hidden people. They're elves, disembodied spirits that behave much like Muslim jinn, in that they're living in a parallel reality to ours, and they're observing us, and they can appear in somewhat human-like form if they desire. So with a little cosmetics, they can look human. In our allegedly secular Western society, we see pop culture routinely visiting themes of spirits and the supernatural and of hauntings. And if we go over to Japan, we see the spirit of the Shinto still quite alive. In fact, a hyper-modern secular nation such as Japan still sees a majority of its citizenry in some way paying respects to Shinto spirits residing in the landscape. So they may identify as non-religious or not terribly spiritual, but they're superstitious. They gamble a lot, they believe in luck charms, and they do these little rituals in order to appease spirits so they can get what they want and keep the peace. And now Indian medicine gets what's going on here. Ayurveda, the traditional medicine of India, is divided into 8 sections. That's your 8-fold path, one of which is entirely devoted to the study of bhutas, or entities. So the Bhuta-ism is, it is what it is. Their influence on health and sanity and the ways one can get rid of them is the subject of Bhutavida, which is the science of entities. And it's considered to be on the same level as surgery and gynecology. So it's, you go to med school in India, you get that. Now, mythopoetic patterns appear with the 14 sections. Let's take a look at this. If we look at traditional Chinese medicine, we find in acupuncture, among the 361 points of the 14 meridians, 17 have the word QA, disincarnate spirit or jinn, as part of their main or secondary name. So to let the genie out of the bottle is the QA. And a QA reminds me of Q&A, a QAnon, an anonymous question and answer. So that's kind of maps onto this ideological glory hole in which people are willing to give themselves away to whatever hashtag swinging dick pops through the hole because, you know, they want to play the game. Now, Osiris is dismembered into those 14 pieces, 13 of which are found, but his penis is missing. So Isis, who is his wife and his sister, cuts her thumb off and uses her thumb. Ugh.
Do you like fish sticks?
Yes!
Huh. What are you, gay fish?
And so, hey, Paul, do you like fish sticks, Paul?
Sure.
What are you, Paul, a gay fish? So apparently Apparently more and more Americans are eating fish sticks. Have you seen this? Have you read about this? Loving fish sticks. Kind of makes me wonder, you know. What is everybody, a gay fish?
It is quite possibly the funniest joke ever conceived, and its origin is unknown. The fish dicks joke crosses all borders, all races, all ages and ethnic groups, and is slowly uniting our country. In fact, the only person who appears to not get the joke is rapper Kanye West, who becomes furious when people use the joke on him.
Despite India's progressive views on medical treatment in the Western world, the topic of non-physical entities is regarded as quite fringe outside the New Age movements or cloistered within the Catholic Church hierarchy. It has rarely been studied seriously outside such dubious confines. Even though entities appear to play a significant role in a number of mental and health disorders, minor and major, one does not find a systematic way to deal with them in any of the main forms of therapy used in modern nations. So mainstream therapy in the West is not handling this. The number of qualified therapists capable of handling entities properly is negligible. In fact, I've never personally met one. And you are not alone. That's a repeated message. As I've suggested in the past, I believe real magic is to be a co-creative process and its ripple effect. It's art in myth-making. That's essentially a collaboration with spirit. Now, just as the Vedic tradition has one gentle Naga Shesha, and the Christians have the Holy Ghost or Holy Spirit, so too we see in what Owen Barfield would call the fossils of consciousness embedded in the etymology of the word genius, this concept of an attendant and benevolent spirit, the paraclete of truth. And even Saturday morning cartoons had Casper, the friendly ghost. In skateboarding, a Casper slide is when you do a board slide upside down on the top of the board, and you put your feet on the bottom of the board. So Casper is happy skateboarding in the underworld as Shesha, the gentle Naga, wise as a serpent but harmless as a dove. Interestingly enough, even though Iceland polls as perhaps the most atheist nation on the planet, their belief in the hidden people, Huldafolka, stems from the 11th century Christianization of Iceland. The collective folklore and literature in Iceland is replete with mentions of and belief in Huldafolka right up to the present era. They have 4 hidden people holidays, and one of them is centered around John the Baptist. One Icelandic Christian folklore claims that the hidden people stem from Eve hiding her disreputable and dirty children from the sight of God. And according to the tale, God then declared, what man hides from God, God will hide from man. So you want to play a joke on God and get over on him? Well, he's going to have the last laugh. Another claims that hidden people originate from Lilith, Adam's first wife, or are fallen angels, Nephilim, condemned to live between heaven and hell. And that's Middle Earth. You got fire, ice, and then water world in the middle, and that's where we are. When Christ tells the repentant thief on the cross he will bring him to paradise, he's not referring to heaven, but to the same in-between place of Christian folklore, expressed most famously in Dante's comedy as Purgatorio. Paradise was Sheol, Hades, where all the dead go. It's a garden purgatory planet. It's a way station, and you're waiting for your Bob Lazar 424 tick-tock ticket out of here. Electric Boogaloo acid test is what I call it. After Christianization, official opposition to dancing may have begun in Iceland as early as the 12th century, and the association of dancing with elves can be seen as early as the 15th century. One folktale shows the Huldafolka elves siding with the common people and taking revenge on a sheriff who banned dance parties. Reminds me of the Electric Boogaloo Breakin' 2. Recent polls show that about half of Icelanders associate the hidden people with the elves, while around 25 suggest elves and Huldafolka are similar but separate classes of entities, and the other 25 aren't sure. Huldafolka are hidden people. Half say they're real and different from elves, and half think maybe they might be elves and they're the same thing. Can't tell. So they still remain partially hidden and veiled. When are we going to see the unveiling, the apocalypse? 1 Corinthians 1:30, Christ becomes Sophia, and in Mark 4:22, he promises there's nothing that's hidden except that it might be made manifest. I covered it up to reveal it. That's kind of like lingerie, or the deep green of the forest you wander into. nor that has become concealed, except that it might come out into plain sight. Things are hidden in plain sight. If anyone has ears to hear, let him listen. Again, Logia 5 of the Gospel of Thomas. The Gospel of or according to Thomas. That's the goat gospel. The 114 word made flesh. The 114th Logia of that Gospel of Thomas is that they were going to make Mary like a man so that she could enter the kingdom. She's going to get something off her chest. It's symbolic language that's meant to be unpacked with modern day colloquialisms because the Holy Spirit can embed modern scripture. And that spirit of the age can embed things like eat, pray, love, or love to eat, pray, right? That's the birds of prey, the sons of disobedience, embedding in the language they give to white Western women. Yeah, just come over to India in your tight yoga pants and bend over and let us get a good look at you. You're not safe over there, ladies. Don't wear yoga pants to India. The people that invented yoga embedded a joke there in the backwards spelling. Eat, pray, love can be anagrammed to say lavatory pee. This is a joke, right? The watchers just want to watch the women bend over and get uncomfortable and pretend they're spiritually enlightened, and it's all complete bullshit. Getting your chakras aligned is just centering up the trunk of your sacred G, I'm a tree, in order to make room for the Bhutas. And Bhutaism is opening up a space inside yourself for the sevenfold path and then the Bhuta. And the sevenfold path are the seven deadly demons of false knowledge. Eat, pray, love. Another anagram is why tell of a rape? Why even talk about it? Let's just worship the Naga.
Maybe there's a Naga living here. Yeah, in the tree, because the tree could be the home of the Nagas. And so then I said, should we do a Naga Puja? And he recommended that. So I went to Geshe Drakpa, and then he explained to me how to do it. And so, because the Nagas, they like things very clean, exceedingly clean. They don't like pollution, dirt, stuff like that. So that it's important to keep the environment clean. Of course, sometimes we don't do so well with that. This is one of the reasons why we ask people in the forest, pee before you go to the forest and after you come back, but not in the forest, if you can, do that, so we don't make the environment dirty. Because if the Nagas are unhappy, then they can cause different diseases and things like skin diseases or bumps or different kinds of things like that.
The Naga sound like the alpha male abusive inmate in a state prison who's going to tell you how to piss. That's not okay.
And so since we share the environment with these Nagas, and especially now, since we have Tara's Refuge, where there's a lot of water there, then it's really nice that we practice generosity and make offerings to them.
Let's take a look at some symbols and patterns from the story of Shesha that map onto both Christ and the idea of Adam's third son, Seth.
Shesha is usually described with a massive coiled body that floats in space or on the universal ocean. In ancient scriptures, he is often depicted serving as a bed on which Vishnu lays in to rest. Sometimes, the massive serpent is represented with 5 or 7 cobra heads. However, it is commonly depicted with 1,000 heads all wearing ornamental crowns. If we follow what was said in the Mahabharata, one of the 2 major Sanskrit literary epics in ancient India, Shesha was born from the union of the sage Kashyapa and Kadru, the mother of all serpents. According to the myth, Kadru gave birth to 1,000 serpents, and Shesha was the oldest among them. Unlike his brothers, whom were aggressive and violent in nature, Shesha was calm and kind. He was so disgusted by the actions of his siblings and the constant harm they did to Garudas, the half-human, half-bird-like creatures that were also the children of the great sage Kashyapa, that he escaped from all of that. He simply left all that violence and misery behind him, choosing to never come back to his kin, and instead took penances and meditated in the sky. That is when Brahma, the Hindu creator god, intervened and asked Shesha to request a boon, whatever it was. the king of all Nagas requested to keep his mind under control so that he could keep doing his penances and meditate in peace. The creator god was satisfied and granted him that wish. Brahma then requested a favor from Adishesha. He asked him to go beneath the earth and stabilize it on top of its hood. The massive serpent gladly accepted and went under the earth. According to the myth, to this day, the Lord of all Nagas is still supporting the earth. Another legend says that when Adishesha uncoils its massive body, time moves forward and creation takes place during that singular time. However, whenever he coils back, the universe ceases to exist.
So if the Bhuta is that spirit, then Bhutaism is Naga worship.
kuyu tang amare rangjung tang rigne yana rangjung tang jizo kozo yewa chimo begara ani di number 2呢 country
现在这个所谓的这个龙也好啊，就天龙八部啊、护法神啊，这些理念呢，就是有些事情呢，就是不一定是现在科学家就完全能证明，因为科学呢，就是它是通过一种仪器和通过一种这个测定，就是测试来这个确定就是它的存在与否和正确与否，就这样的。那么我们现在就是在世界当中呢，有很多就是我们的肉眼感官就是根本不能确定的许许多多的一些神秘奥秘的东西。比如说现在就是龙王也好，护法神也好，这个一些这个废人也好，就是他们的这个存在呢，现在很多科学家也是非常的惊讶。包括我们在藏地呢，就是也有很多的这些概念。我个人而言是从小都是在佛教的一个文化当中就是成长的，然后呢就是对龙王啊，对土地神啊，就是这些的存在是这个深信不疑。但是我们通过语言来说的话呢，可能需要就是作为科学家呢，就是一定要就是正视就是当地的这个以前的一些智者们，就是他所造的这个论点的依据，并且呢在社会当中是发生的一些事情来就是进行对比。比如说我们藏地呢，就是有很多的就是与这个护法神与人类之间的一些这个对话，就是这些关系啊，这些都是完全是一种神话的话呢，我的是就绝对不相信，就是然后这个龙王的这个存在，龙王这个水里面的就包括就是当时的这个龙母菩萨就是从这个龙宫里面带来的这个般若经也好，然后这个就是有些这个经典呢，就是从龙宫当中就是得到的，就是这些收集啊，就是这些相比较起来的话呢，那么现在就是应该是可以承认就是有这么一个众生，但这些众生的话呢，佛教当中也说，就是它并不是我们每个人都能看得到的，就是就像我们的电子的这个磁场啊，就是电子磁场的话呢，它并不是人人都看得到，只是物理这个学家、量子力学家呢，他发现就是他而且承认是有据有理的，并且它的作用呢，它也会有不同的这个说明。所以呢，我经常在想，这个佛教呢，就是相当于是一个量子力学那样的一种课门，它没有一个就是专题的或者是专家就是进行研究的话，那就是可能是不一定就是知道它深奥的意义。所以我这次到了美国以后，一方面就是特别学习很多高等大学呢，就是跟这个藏传的文化佛教啊，就是还是很重视的。但另一方面呢，有些是可能这个文化的背景不同啊，就文化的背景不同，就是有很多一些这个老师呢，就是对西藏的这个有些这个看法也好，或者是有些故事的话呢，就认为是一种这个传说或者是一种神话。有些我也不敢说没有这个神话，确实也有神话，但有些的话呢，我们那边是真实在的历史，然后到这里就变成神话的话，可能不太合理。我说因为这个 可能就是虽然我们提倡地球村，但是东西方文化呢现在还没有完全就是融入，所以美国这边的有些这个发生的事情呢，我们在课堂上说是这是美国的一个神话故事的话呢，可能就是也并不是这个很好的，就是所以我感觉呢，就是可能还是有些适合的话呢，就是他的这种专业的这个研究，就是这是非常非常有必要的。
No, I got it. I was actually trying to to say that, it seems like an ongoing question of like studying things like I mean, in the Western Academy, it's relegated to the realm of culture, but from their perspective, it's part of nature. So I was trying to just make a point about this separation of culture and nature.
So we have some fascinating overlap between language and then the imagery that the language implies and how it overlaps. So think of that au revoir of James Cameron, who's made some of the biggest blockbusters in movie history. And we have JC, the initials of Jesus, and his name is James, the twin brother of Christ. In the Gospel of Thomas, Christ says that the world came into being for James, and he is the most just and righteous in this world, which is interesting. Now, the Magi and the Nagai or Nagi and the Naggers are symbolically represented as people of color, and these are the orcs of Tolkien. Tolkien made no secret about his embedding race relations into the different beings within Middle Earth. The dwarves who dig into the mountains looking for gold and gems were the Jews, and they've got big noses and they're kind of short and a little insecure and grumpy at times. And then you've got the elves who are kind of spiritual, ethereal, effeminate, and play the long game. So they represent those Naga that are kind of maybe neutral jinn spirits. They're not taking sides. They're just staying up in the mountains and seeing how this plays out. And then you have the master builders. They're only master builders because they are in the job of demolition. And once you do enough demolition, you got to do more master building before you can demolish some more stuff. Now we have a fractal of different faces and pagan spirits embedded in the imagery of Goya to the point where it's impossible to deny. And then there's the fact that I used the Albrecht Dürer crucifixion image, this famous painting from 1505, to predict a message for the world in 2021. And I suggested a ripple was going to pass through here, and it was going to end and be over with in 2022, mapping onto the Pentecostal spirit breathed out by Christ in John 20:22. So we have numbers and patterns and language and symbols. I'll come back to this crucifix image. You've seen this before, but there's the embedded image of a Tasmanian devil from Looney Tunes in the face of Christ here, and I'm going to get back to that. So let's take a look at this idea that that co-creative faculty that's outside of time and space can like read all of eternity like a book, and you can just skip ahead and see what's coming and use that information to embed some foreshadowing back into history. So if we think of the historical timeline as something like a novel in progress or a work in progress, then that's the Balrog with the fiery whip, the fiery work in progress. And you wait until you see that twist at the end. Jason was right the whole time. Jason's from an inverted world and has already seen this pattern play out. So we have Shakespeare over here, the guy with the big stick. Is he gonna shake the spear, or is he a spear chucker or a spear shaker? He can't make up his mind. See, he's gonna do whatever she wants, right? He's gonna be whoever she needs to be. To get what he wants. That's Sauron in disguise. Sauron is no ruach, backwards. So, again, the paradoxical co-occurrence of opposites, good and evil, fire and ice, water world, being a place that goes to extremes. There's ice and fire within Waterworld. That means people that are walking through the Purgatorio or the desert can mistake one thing for the other. Sometimes you don't need to touch the darkness at all, right? The elves are seeking to exterminate the orcs. So when Galadriel wants to go back on another Galahad mission and do the thing that she feels she needs to do, maybe she's not supposed to do that in the first place, and it might not even be possible. And it also maps onto Nazis exterminating a race of people. So something's not right here. We see that arrow of desire embedded in the shape of the ship and the wake in the water. There's something that is not left or left unfinished. This is Galahad or Galadriel as Jonah, right? I never got the Holy Grail. I got to go back and get the Grail. I'm not ready to die. So I want to go back in time. That's Cher looking for her false sonny, Bono. Oh boy, I'm not ready to die. I got to go back. And then we have the resurrected Gandalf the White. So he has seen fire and he has seen rain. He's like James Woods after going to the McLean Hospital for some insulin coma treatments. So he went through the game and went in the box, dealt with the Slim Shadim, and he's no longer Gandalf the Grey. He's no longer from the in-between world. He's left and then come back. So he's kind of like an avatar. He's like that post-resurrection Christ who went through the harrowing of hell. So we have the Nephilim giant, and then we have the Gandalf. So we have Gandalf the Grey, sacrifices himself, goes down and fights Balrog, but he actually was supposed to turn around and run with the hobbits and help them get the job done. That was the wrong move. So in the Choose Your Own Adventure story of Gandalf the Grey's life, he's pre-baptism Jesus. And so he goes through this experience, which is a transformation, and becomes baptized. And now the Holy Spirit has descended on him. And again, we see symbolism here of an eyelash in that fallen dragon, and that's El, that's L, and that's the cosmetics of the pheromones and the hormones. So part of Pharaoh's magic is illusion and deception and razzle-dazzle and using women as temptation to get weak men who can't say no to women, particularly men of power who can't say no to women who have a weakness. They use those goats in order to get up the mountain. And they use those goats with the weakness for the women as kind of pack mules to get stuff up to the mountain that's not supposed to be up there. Maybe that's what Moses was doing. But anyway, Gandalf had to go learn his lesson like Jonah did. He had to go down through that fire and then land as Meteor Man and then help the hobbits restart their whole race because he got them killed by not doing the thing he was supposed to do. So there's this symbolic time travel here where Jesus compares himself to Jonah. Now, when Jesus dies on the cross and he's confused, he says, "Father, why have you forsaken me?" in one of the Gospels. He didn't see it coming. That's the sin optic. He was looking in the wrong place. He didn't see it coming because he didn't read the Gospel of John. It's time to go, Jay. It's time to go, John. It's time to take the piss. Go to the John. Anyway, we've got the giant meteor man here is essentially Jesus as Jonah. He goes back in time and does the Jonah thing and goes through the desert of the real. So that quarantina and wrestling with temptation could be the meteor man's spell down here with the Harfords. And he's going to turn them into the hobbits so that they can complete the quest. Galadriel cannot complete that quest. And we also see something that looks like a dilated vulva opening up and giving birth to Galadriel. So we have the beast of burden giving birth to the beast of burden. We have false light from another world, or is that the real light? And then we have the fiery dragon coming down with Gandalf. So we have a light from one world entering into another, and then this other light coming in. So an exchange of information, possibly, right? We'll give you one of ours for one of yours. This kind of reminds me of negotiating with terrorists in purgatory, and they're letting someone out of hell and they go down into purgatory, and then we let someone out of heaven and they go down into purgatory and they participate in this song of fire and ice, which is Sophia, but that's a bad spell if we think of the Notaricon, initials, song of fire in air, that's Sophia. Song of females in aria, in air, that's the angels or the fallen angels. So we have this symbolism of men and women trading places, moving from one world to another, transgenderism mapping onto this Pattern in Jonah and Jason in the book of Acts 17, the inverted world. And we have Balrog versus Gandalf the Grey, kind of as a kayfabe. You hear for a minute there, Gandalf kind of cries out the move that Balrog's about to make, as if it's scripted.
I will not avail you, flame of Udun!
So this looks like a little bit of kayfabe, and Gandalf is telling Balrog, you shall not pass, meaning you shall fail. So he's telling him, I'm going to give you a failing grade. And then Balrog's mad. He looks kind of like Donkey Kong. He's like a big ape-looking guy, like a giant orc. So I think of that. Gandalf the Grey, he's in the middle, mixed. And then you've got Balrog, he's black. So we've got that CR2 cathode ray tube kayfabe theater embedded right in that language. And then we've got the teacher telling the student they're going to fail, then the student retaliates. We went into that in the Narcissism Rising. That's that false light, people being told they're unicorns. No, dude, just throw the ring in the fire and keep it pushing.
Go back to the shadow.
But sometimes the lights shine just as brightly reflected in the water as they do in the sky. How am I to know which lights to follow?
Sometimes we cannot know until we have touched the darkness.
Galadriel is Galahad and Ariel, the fallen angel who transformed into the flesh in order to finish a job, a song of fire and ice. And so we have here this idea of the rite of passage that is at the heart of the teenageification of Western society. Western society acts 17, right? Literally, as if they're 17 years old. Acts 17. Now 17, well, Q is the 17th letter of the alphabet. So, hey, yo, can I ask you a question? Why do you think that this race war keeps going on? It's because we're under a bad spell and we don't speak the same language to one another. And we don't speak honestly about what we think about each other, right? I think you look stupid in your sagging pants. It makes you look like a fucking moron. I know you're better than that, but you're lost in this game. I know these girls want to touch the Holy Spirit, but they're willing to put revealing, practically translucent spandex pants on and go bend over in front of a bunch of Slim Shadim. The M&M, that's the manifoldness. Look at the M's, the mountains. The cocaine, the watchers. The cannibals, the cannibals. They sit around and watch us destroy each other and drive each other insane. These are the disembodied spirits whose punishment is to sit in this world but not be able to touch it. It was portrayed wonderfully in Ghost. I forget the actor's name. He just wants a drag from one of the cigarettes, right? And then we see him in Better Off Dead. He's the math teacher who just wants to get up in Lane Meyer's girlfriend. I just want one drag. Oh, what I wouldn't give for one drag. You know what they would give for a drag? They'd come back as something completely else, just to play one more go around in this quarantina, right? I want a few more weeks off of work. I'm willing to not take the vax and go get sick on purpose. I think a lot of people want to be victims, and so everything in the world that seems like an inconvenience is some clandestine conspiracy to fuck you up. And maybe it is, but it's more of a joke than an actual Illuminati conspiracy as articulated by people who work for the agencies they claim to expose. So we have Christ going into the underworld like Jonah during the harrowing of Hades, and he's going to come back for Bob Lazarus. Without the spiritual faculties made manifest through the right hemisphere of the brain, these disembodied spirits only think like AI and like Spock, right? Everything is either logical or illogical, but things are upside down.
We're making ourselves wretched. There are no two ways about it. We are more affluent than ever, but riches and power, the only point in having riches, do not make people happier. Ask a psychiatrist. Or take a look at the face of Vladimir Putin, with power, alas, of life and death over millions of people, and the owner of the most expensive lavatory paper dispenser in the world. No, affluent as we are also more anxious, depressed, lonely, isolated, and lacking in purpose than we have ever been. The effect is of staggering size, and the evidence is clear. It can be shown to have little to do with diagnostic fashion. So why is this? I suggest it is because we have no longer the foggiest idea what a human life is about. Indeed, there's a sense in which we no longer live in a world at all, but exist in a simulacrum of our own making. You expect me to speak of brains, and I will not disappoint you. Leaving nuance aside and condensing 3 decades of research and a vast body of supporting evidence into a phrase, we are now mesmerized by the least intelligent part of our brain. For reasons of survival, one hemisphere of the brain, the left, has evolved over millions of years to favor manipulation, grabbing, getting, and controlling, while the other, the right, has effectively been given sole charge of the task of understanding the whole picture. So conflicting are these goals that in humans, the hemispheres are largely sequestered one from the other. Our apparent ability these days to hear only what comes from the left hemisphere does not depend on the brain itself having radically changed in the last couple of centuries, though it is certainly always evolving. It's more like this. You buy a radio set, and you soon find a couple of channels worth listening to. For a host of reasons, after a while, you end up listening only to one. It's not the radio set that's changed, it's you. And in the case of the brain, it would not even have mattered so much if we'd settled on the intelligent channel. But we didn't. We settled on the one whose value is nothing to do with truth, nor with courage, magnanimity, and generosity, but only greed, grabbing, and getting, manipulation. And no, the difference between the hemispheres is not a myth that has been debunked. That itself is a myth that requires debunking, and which I've been rather successfully debunking for some while now. What definitely does need to be debunked is the bad old pop psychology story that the left hemisphere does reason and language, and maybe a bit dull, but is at least reliable, like a slightly boring accountant. And the right hemisphere does emotions and pictures, but is apt to be flighty and fey. All this is wrong, since we now know that each hemisphere is involved in everything, and that, for the record, the left hemisphere is less emotionally stable, as well as less intelligent, and I mean cognitively, as well as emotionally and socially, than the right. The right hemisphere is a far superior guide to reality. Delusions and hallucinations are much more frequent, grosser, and more persistent after damage to the right hemisphere than to the left. Without the right hemisphere to rely on, the left hemisphere is at sea. It quite literally denies the most obvious facts, lies, and makes stuff up when it doesn't know what it's talking about. And it is relentlessly, vacuously cheerful in the face of overwhelming disaster.
In closing, I'd like to point out something I've noticed coming from both sides of the polarized political aisle, and it's that glee in the chaos of now.
Ancestors watching, I know they're watching. Ancestors watching, I know. Now call out your ancestors into the room.
Are you starting to get some Sophia, the Song of Fire in the Air? The Cold War agents of the Cold War, the Fire and Ice, the dragons in the Snow Guard?
Take those kids! Hey guys, stop the fighting! touch him! Yo, back up! Back up! You're not gonna do that, boy! You crazy? Shut up, let's go. Get your hands off, go. Word, come on. Crazy, boy. Ah, knock this shit, boy.
Son was right. Yeah? You're mud. Godless clay. I created a living golem.
What the fuck is a golem?
It's a monster, Frankenstein.
Get the fuck out of here.
Living dead.
If I take that asshole son of yours and shove him up your ass.
Are you a Christian? Are you a Christian? Are you a Christian?
And it took almost a year for me to realize that this movement is much more than a racial and social justice movement. At its core, it's a spiritual movement. You know, I laugh a lot with Waukesha, you know, and I didn't meet her in her body, right? I met her through this work. Important practice. Hashtags are, for us, are way more than a hashtag. It is literally almost resurrecting a spirit so they can work through us to get the work that we need to get done. I started to feel personally connected and responsible and accountable to them. Both from a deeply political place, but also from a deeply spiritual place. And my tradition, you offer things that your loved one who passed away would want, you know, whether it's like honey or tobacco.
Oh, I'd give anything for a drag. Just one drag.
Lonely rivers flow to the sea, to the sea. Boys! Avenge me! Avenge me!
I believe so many of them work through us.
Ancestors watching, I know they're watching. Ancestors watching, I know, I know. Now call out your ancestors into the room, loud so we can hear you. Ella Baker. It only took us 5 minutes to shift the energy in this space together.
Okay, my name is Tupac Shakur, and I attend Tamalpais High School, and I'm 17 years old.
Were you old enough to remember when that record came out?
It only took us 5 minutes to shift the energy in this space together.
Buck up, little camper. We'll beat that slope together.
Man, now that's a real shame when folks be throwing away a perfectly good white boy like that.